David, did you have a poem or just should we say
Yes,
the blessing?
yes, I do have a poem. Would you like to
Okay,
hear it?
let's go ahead.
Okay, the poem today is one of my very favorites of all time. It was written between 1021 and 1080 by Solomon ben Geboro and translated, my favorite translation, by Israel Zangui. And
No, I think it's Israel Zangwill.
Zangwell, yes.
Zangwill, yeah, is the
Zangwell.
translator, right?
Okay, and here goes. Lord of the world, he reigned alone, while yet the universe was not. When by his will all things were wrought, then first his sovereign name was known. And when the all shall cease to be, in dread lone splendor he shall reign. He was, he is, he shall remain in glorious eternity. For he is one no second shares his nature or his loneliness. Unending and beginningless, all strength is his, all sway he bears. He is the living God to save, my rock while sorrows, toils endure, my banner and my stronghold sure, the cup of life whene'er I crave. I place my soul within his palm before I sleep, as when I wake. And though my body I forsake, rest in the Lord in fearless calm. Thank you, Rabbi.
Otherwise known as Adon Olam.
Adon Olam, yeah.
Right, exactly,
I think it's
exactly.
good to go back to that from time to time.
Right. Okay. All right. So our bracha is Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We're grateful for the opportunity, even if it's only three of us, to study Torah. Actually, in Pirkei Avot, it says anytime that there are two people who get together to study Torah, God's presence dwells among them. So we welcome God's presence along with the Zoom coordinator and and whatever. All right, so we'll see if David, why don't you're doing Bahar, right, which is the second
Yeah.
last parsha of Leviticus. So let's catch us up back there,
Okay, shall I begin?
please.
Okay, Bahar. I have a number of sources that I was studying over the weekend and before that to prepare for this. But Bahar continues the cycle of sacred seasons, began in the last one, and the system of Sabbath, the Sabbath at the end of each week, Pentecost at the end of 7 weeks, the 7 month, the sacred months, studded with many festivals, is going to be completed by the Sabbatical year and by the Jubilee, which came after a week of sabbatical years. Wendy and I got some very interesting gifts in the last month from Marty and Sue Cohen, and they were by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one, Judaism's life-changing ideals. And in Bahar, he says, we are what we do not own. It's kind of interesting because Rabbi Sachs begins with meeting two people, Morris and Vivienne Wall. And they were two of the most remarkable couples he had ever met. And they were a study in contrast. Morris was quiet, introspective, reflective, and reserved. Vivienne was outgoing and vivacious, a people person in the truest sense. And they remind me of a couple that I used to work for when I was much, much younger, a German couple who had started a camp named Lothar and Paula Epstein. Lothar was very gruff, could be very mean. Paula was far outgoing. And I didn't realize that until one day I was in camp and Lothar was one of his very bad moods. He came and he said, what are you doing? When are you going to get this done? And he hit me in the shoulder. And I stopped and I said, you just hit me. And he kind of grumbled and walked away. And Paula came up and said, Lothar, you can't do that to him. He's one of our best employees. Now, come on, you have to apologize. And Lothar said, no. And Paula said, he is actually a wonderful, wonderful man. and you must forgive him. And I said, of course I do. I mean, I'm only 20, and of course I do. And it turned out she was right. We got to be very good friends. And maybe some other time there's a couple of stories I could tell with that. The life-changing idea that comes in his book from Bahar is, in life we ask not, what can I gain? But instead we ask, what can I give? Be a blessing to others, and you will find that life has been a blessing for you. The other book was one of 5 by Sachs and Behar. It's, he writes, it begins with a single chapter that, despite its brevity, had a transformative impact on the social structure of ancient Israel and provided a unique solution to an otherwise intractable conflict between 2 fundamental ideals, freedom and equality. Much of human history has illustrated the fact that you can have freedom, without equality, laissez-faire economics, Reaganomics, or equality without freedom, communism and socialism, but not both. And he goes on with some very interesting thoughts about that, and I really strongly recommend this set of 5 books by Rabbi Sachs. Okay, now here we get into the actual Bahar. I'm trying, everything kind of gets mixed up here. Okay, Bahar is Hebrew for on the mount. The 5th word, it does not mean on the mount for a telescope, although I suppose you could interpret that in that way. But I believe it refers to the geological mountain. It's the 5th word and the first distinctive word, and it's the 32nd weekly portion and the 9th in the book of Leviticus. It is not the shortest Torah portion in the book of Leviticus. It is the shortest portion in Leviticus, although not the shortest in the Torah, which is pretty appropriate for a nice boiling hot June morning. In the first reading, God is telling Moses to tell the Israelites the law of the sabbatical year of the land. The people could work the fields for 6 years, but in the 7th year, the land was to have a Sabbath of complete rest, laying fallow for that year, and during which the people were not to sow their fields, prune their vineyards, or reap the aftergrowth. They could, however, eat whatever the land produced on its own. And the people went even further than that, the Jubilee year, to hallow the 50th year, and to proclaim release for all with a blast of the shofar. Each Israelite was returned to his family and his ancestral land holding. In the second reading, Leviticus 25, 14 to 18, they're talking about selling and buying property. The people are to charge only for the remaining number of crop years until the Jubilee, with the land, when the land would be returned to its ancestral holder. In the third reading, God promises to bless the people in the 6th year, so that the land would yield a crop sufficient for 3 further years. God prohibited selling the land beyond reclaim, for God owned the land. The people did not own the land, even though they may have contracts that say they do, but they are but strangers living with God. It's more as if they are asked to support the land. They are taking care of it. And on a direct personal note, the house here in Vail that Wendy and I have lived for 26 years now We feel the same way. We do not own it, but it is our charge to care for it. It's a very, very special thing. The fourth reading, if one has to sell the land, his nearest relative was to redeem what was sold. And if there was no one to redeem, but prospered and acquired enough wealth, he could refund the prorated share of the sales price for the remaining years until the Jubilee, and then return to his holding. In the fifth reading again, if one sold a house in a walled city, one could redeem it for a year, and thereafter the house would pass to the purchaser beyond reclaim and would not be released in the Jubilee. But houses in some villages that didn't have encircling walls were treated as open country, subject to redemption and release through the Jubilee. The sixth reading, further in Leviticus 25, if the kinsman continued in straits and had to give himself over to a creditor for debt, the creditor was not to subject him to the treatment of a slave, but to treat him as a hired or bound laborer until the Jubilee year. And at that point, he had to be freed. In the seventh reading, if an Israelite falls onto bad times and comes under a resident alien's authority because of his debts or failure to pay his debts, the Israelite debtor was to have the right of redemption. A relative was to redeem him, or if he prospered, he could redeem himself by paying a prorated share of the sales price for the remaining years until the Jubilee. The portion also goes on talking a little bit about Yom Kippur. There's a lot about Yom Kippur in Leviticus, and the Day of Atonement, and there is Shabbaton, a Sabbath of solemn rest, and then a holy congregation. There are a number of commandments that I'd like to read a few of them that come out. There are 7 positive and whopping 17 negative commandments. And you're not to work the land during the 7th year, and that's very important. A lesson that I learned when I was an undergraduate student at Acadia. You need to lie fallow and recover. You are not to work with trees to produce fruit during that year, not to gather grapes, and then the positive ones, you are to buy and sell according to Torah law, not to overcharge or underpay for an article, not to insult or harm anybody with words, not to sell the land in Israel indefinitely, and to carry out the laws of sold family properties. Finally, the Haftorah for Behar comes from Jeremiah, and it deals with other laws related to land possession and inheritance. In the Haftorah for Behar, we read about how one of these laws affects the prophet Jeremiah and his family. Even though Judah is under siege and exile seems imminent, Jeremiah agrees to purchase the land. He measures out symbol, writes up a deed. So he measures out silver, writes up a deed of ownership, seals it, and has it witnessed by other prisoners, presumably. Jeremiah gives the deed to Baruch, son of Neriah, who often functions as Jeremiah's assistant. Jeremiah then explains to his fellow prisoners that this act is a symbol of a promise from God. Even though Judea is suffering under siege, houses, fields, and vineyards shall again be purchased in this land. And on that note, I'm going to leave this very interesting portion
Okay.
where God is trying to explain
Thank you.
what he is meaning in his
Nice.
commandments. Back to you, Rabbi.
Nice summary, David. Thank you. And of course, the phrase is, on the Jubilee year, that proclaim liberty throughout the land unto all the inhabitants thereof, which comes on the Liberty Bell, although it was specifically related then back to the slaves, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. My wife just entered the door. Hang on one second. Winnie? I don't know how that happened. Okay, relax for a while. Well, yes or no? I mean, we can leave earlier too. Don't you have your class? I'm in my class, yeah. Okay. Okay. She went to a dentist appointment and they said, no, it's next month. But on this day next month, we're not here. So anyway, okay. So we'll quickly go through. I'll try to do some highlights. So as David mentioned, Bahar is the second last portion in Leviticus. When we double up the portions, Bahar and Bechukotai, which comes afterwards, are frequently brought together. And as you said, it's the shortest portion. Bahar is the shortest portion in Leviticus. Bechukotai is the second shortest portion in Leviticus. So when you put them together, they become a normal length, if you will. It begins with the reward and punishment context that God says, Moses is presenting God's word, that if you follow my commandments and injunctions, then some of the following rewards will be your inheritance. There will be abundant rain in monsoon seasons, abundant harvest, security in the land, peace. You'll have victory if you're attacked. You will have many children, and they will not know hunger in their lives. But if you don't follow my laws, God says, there will be terrible illnesses, lack of harvests. You will be defeated in battle. Your trees will not bear fruit. Wild beasts will threaten you. Your cities will be laid waste. People will be scattered, and those who survive will wish that they had perished. But in what's called a nechemta, a compassionate, positive ending. But even if you're faced with all these threats and consequences, negative consequences, God will still remember the brit, the covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and will not totally reject Israel, neither totally nor permanently. The book ends with some additional laws concerning vows and gifts and payments to the sanctuary, specific values for what those donations might be, but also with the notice that gives us the context of trumat halev, of a free will and a gift of the heart, that if someone pleads poverty but they still want to make an offering, or they still want to participate in the ritual life of the community, the priest can, at his discretion, the priest can accept a smaller sacrifice or a smaller donation. For example, if the promised donation normally would be a whole animal, that the priest can determine what the worth might be of maybe only one limb of the animal or something like that. And remembering that, as David was saying, that the lesson of Bahar, also as extrapolated by the late Rabbi Sachs, remember that everything returns to its original owner at the Jubilee time in the 50th year, the original owner being God, actually. But we know that since the year 70 of the Common Era, not only when the temple was destroyed, but that was the last meeting of the Sanhedrin, and the Sanhedrin were the ones, like the Supreme Court, who would identify the year of the Jubilee and would make sure that everything is done according to Hoyle. We know this since the Sanhedrin stopped in the year 70, when the Romans destroyed the temple, that there haven't been any celebrations of the Jubilee since that time. When we mark the end of the book of Leviticus, of course, we say Chazak, Chazak, Benit Chazek, be strong, and we strengthen each other. The fourth book of the Torah is Bamidbar, in a wilderness, or in the wilderness of Sinai. It's known in English as Numbers, because it begins with a census. Although from the Jewish point of view, it describes the most of the wanderings of the children of Israel, beginning 1 year and 1 month after the Exodus from Egypt. So it's the 39 last years of the 40 years of wandering that are described in the book of Numbers, or Bamidbar. Um, the God tells Moses to call the people to assemble and take a census, especially of all the Israelite males over the age of 20. That's the age by which they would bear arms. And there's a little bit of discrepancy in how the numbers come out. We do hear the number 603,550, but and then you can kind of geometrically go from there. But that's if that's only the males over the age of 20, of how many more of other younger males, or and then how many women, and how many of the younger children, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So the numbers aren't really exact. And as a matter of fact, in the next paragraph, there's even a question, or if not a contradiction. Those numbers do not include the Levites, nor the Kohanim, nor the priests themselves. Since they can't bear arms, their responsibility is to the sanctuary. So they weren't counted. And the Levites, and then the subgroup of the Kohanim, of the priests, were the ones who, as the concentric circles around the Mishkan, around the sanctuary, or the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, as they were set up, of which tribe would be where in the concentric circles. The Levites and the priests were always the ones who were the closest in. They were the last line of battle, if necessary, to protect the Mishkan. They establish a pattern for those, and again, a particular number of 273, and exactly where that came from, we're not really sure, but that there were some 273 of the 22,000 who were additionally serving as Levites, etc. Again, there's complications in understanding exactly what the numbers are supposed to mean, but they do establish the pattern of what's called the Pidyon Haben, of the redemption of the firstborn, who, if for one reason or another was not going to serve in the priesthood, or in the clan of the Levites, the individual, the son, could be redeemed back, for at the time, for a cost of 5 shekels per son, that were given to the priests and the Levites, so that either they could hire other individuals to do some of the manual labor, or if they were other priests where they may be questionable as to their eligibility to serve, that they might be able to look the other way, if you will. I had a colleague, Ruth Ann, you'll get a chuckle out of this one. I had a colleague who said the establishment of that first shekel paid, the first 5 shekels paid to the priests to make sure that all the service could be conducted appropriately, was the first rabbi's discretionary fund.
Oh, okay.
So, okay, based on some of our conversations, I thought you'd appreciate that. All right, the Kohanim, the priests, are responsible for dismantling and preparing the Mishkan, all of the sanctuary, the altar, the table, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The Kohanim would prepare it. And then all of the sacred objects were to be secured and covered in dolphin skins, if they were available, or in specially noted cloths. I'm not sure how many dolphins they could find in the middle of the desert while they were walking around, or whatever. Um, there's an extra special role for the subgroup, or the subclan, one of the sons of Levi. So one of the clans in the tribe of Levi, the Kohathites, and those who were, let's call them, today we would use the phrase active seniors. So those who were 30 to 50 years old, they were the ones who were appointed to actually carry the holiest the holiest objects. That's what the book of Numbers, the portion of Bamidbar of Numbers basically includes. We move on to Naso, which is the second portion, beginning as of near the middle of chapter 4 of Numbers, continues talking about the census and the numbers, and again, there's a play on words in the English where you talk about the count or the accountability of those particular tribes, those particular subgroups, and the clans of the Levites, especially. So, for example, the Gershonites, again, the active seniors, 30 to 50 years old, they would carry some of the coverings, the hangings, the cords, the accessories. The Mirrorites, 30 to 50 years old, they would carry the planks and the bars and the posts and the pegs that would keep everything together, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Moses instructs them um, that if anyone commits a wrong, they didn't like have the word sin in that sense, but commits a wrong or a misdeed towards another person. Example, if something had been someone steals from another person, if there had been robbery, that there was a process. Again, as David mentioned a few, so 2 weeks previously, they talked a little more about Yom Kippur and Day of Atonement. Here, Moses is talking in terms of the restitution, and having a confession that was demanded, and if possible, if the object that had been stolen could be returned, not only would you return the object, but you add a 20% value as punishment on top of it. Nassau also carries or includes the very strange ritual of what's called the Sotah, Sotah. It's very strange. It's extremely complex. It's very, very troubling. And indeed, there's an entire tractate of the Talmud that deals obviously with a lot of the complications and the ramifications of this particular scenario as described in the Torah and everything that it meant. Simply put, the scenario, as I said, of the sota was if a husband suspects his wife of being unfaithful to him. But if there are no witnesses, I mean, if there are witnesses, then there was a different procedure on how it would be treated as adultery. But if there were no witnesses, and again, then you get into the situation again that the Talmud would address of who qualifies to be a witness, and how do you determine objectivity, and how many witnesses do you need? Can you convict someone based on only one witness, or do you need two? How old do those witnesses have to be? How do you determine their impartiality, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? But in this particular case, if a husband suspects his wife of being unfaithful and there are no witnesses, she's brought before the priest, and asked to defend herself or whatever. And if she denies any act of unfaithfulness or adultery, the priest mixes up a particular liquid mixture that's called in the Torah's phrase, it's called the water of bitterness. We can only imagine what it must have tasted like. It was water, earth, and ashes from some of the animal sacrifices, and apparently by drinking that mixture, it induced some kind of a trance. And the belief was that when the woman was answering in a trance is when the truth actually came. It's like a truth serum. The truth actually would come out. And so if she drinks this and if she shows signs of sickness, with here they meant like hallucinatory or speaking nonsense or whatever, then that was an indication that she was guilty. And if she doesn't become sick, if she still insists in logically and literally in defending herself, then the assumption, the priest's assumption, was allowed to be that she was innocent. Um, the and again, there were certain restrictions that were added to this scenario. We're not really sure how often, if ever, it took place. It must have taken place. It's kind of not really the kind of encounter that people would just imagine. So there may have been some kind of a historical reference or came from some other tribe. We don't really know. But by the times of the Mishnah, there were additional restrictions added on to the process to make it all the more difficult, not to make it all the more difficult to convict the woman who claims that she is innocent. And then certainly again, as with the Jubilee year, once the Sanhedrin had been destroyed and dissolved in the year 70 of the Common Era, there's no more practice of this of the sota. A similar procedure is what when we talked about this on Saturday morning during the Torah reading, is that of the Nazarite, the Nazir, a man or a woman who makes a voluntary vow of abstinence and of service to God, man or woman. They must not cut their hair, they must not drink wine or any other intoxicant, have no sexual relations, nor any contact with a corpse, even a dead body of an immediate family member. To be a Nazir, to be a Nazarite, was a specific finite term that one would vow to abstain and live that kind of a lifestyle. And then there was a very specific ritual that was endured in returning to the community and being able to celebrate with the community, symbolized by actually drinking the wine, because that's the that's how we celebrate the most. We do know that there were those who took this oath, the Nazarite oath, throughout history, and the Haftarah portion describes the story of Samson, who was a Nazarite not by his own volition, but because a prophet comes to his mother and father and tells them that God wants their son to be a Nazarite. So they kind of were changing the modus operandi of how one would behave, whether it was a voluntary choice or whether it was something that was ordained by God. Furthermore, in Nassau, we have the threefold benediction, the priest's benediction, pronouncing the words that of God's formula upon the people. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha, may God bless you and keep you, etc., etc., etc. But then the concluding statement, the concluding verse, which most people do not include, is that God says, "And they," meaning the priests or the blessers, shall recite these words in my name, but I am the one who blesses the people. Um, one day after this, on the day after the sanctuary is completed, Moses dedicates it and all its furnishings. And for the next 12 days, the tribal chieftains all bring special offerings to the Levites. Big celebration. It's strange. I think it's the only occurrence in the Torah of a celebration that lasts 12 days. We usually have things that are 7, or even eight, because it might end on the eighth day, which is at the end of the 7 day week. But 12 is an interesting number. Again, most people think it's just it was an arbitrary number related to the 12 tribes. That each day one of the 12 tribes was highlighted as being, well, you get the special role today, and then tomorrow the next tribe will do, and the next tribe, the next tribe. Moses can speak to God only by entering the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting, and there he listens for God's voice, and then can speak only when God announces that God is ready to hear Moses's concern. And Moses then stands and addresses God from between the two cherubim, the two angelic figures on the opposite sides of the altar. Okay, so those are the other parshiot and sidras between uh, from last from last time we met, leading up to this week, and then so a few words, and I'm going to intentionally cut this a little short, but the few words about beha'alotecha or beha'alotcha, depending on whether you're reading or chanting, because the vowel changes a little bit with the diacritical marks, with the trope marks. It's beha'alotcha or beha'alotecha. Um, in That's Numbers chapter 8 and into verse 12. Um, Beha'alotcha means to lift up, and we're talking about lifting up, especially the candelabrum, the seven-branched candelabrum. That might or might not be, depending on where we are in the history of the wandering. It may or may not be the Ner Tamid. There are some people who insist that yes, it's the same light that was lit regularly, and there are others that say no, it functioned in a little bit differently, having the seven branches. Um, but there some of the initial highlights of the portion. One is the specific instructions for what the menorah, the candelabrum, the seven-branched candelabrum, of what it was made of, what it looked like, how it should be stored, and how it should be lit, how it should be consecrated by the priests and the Levites. Then there's also a repetition of the laws about Pesach. Apparently, they discovered that there were some of the Israelites who, for one reason or another, did not celebrate Chag HaPesach, did not celebrate the festival of the Paschal offering. Not the Exodus from Egypt Passover, but the original holiday that was the Paschal offering. And so it was discovered, for whatever reason, that there were some individuals who hadn't observed it, and we're going to give them a second chance, because everyone has to have participated in this Paschal offering to be eligible to have crossed the Sea of Reeds and to have stood at Mount Sinai, etc. So there's a repetition, and an allowance for those who needed to go back and offer the Paschal sacrifice. Moses commands the people to create what they called. It's a little bit different than what we see it, but they were originally called shofarot. Now, when we hear of a shofar, we think of the ram's horn, and certainly later on in Jewish tradition, that's the instrument of choice and necessity. But when Moses talks about the shofarot here in Beha'alotcha, in this Torah portion, he's talking as much about the silver trumpets, or the simple musical instrument, but it was made of silver, that could be blown, that would signal that the people would move on, signal, depending on the particular sound or the particular voice that they heard from the trumpet, that either to move forward, or to gather and assemble, to go into battle, or that we're starting a celebration or some other joyous occasion. So there had to be, in addition to the ram's horn shofarot, there also had to be these silver trumpets, which the psalmist refers to as chatzotzrot. We're not really sure what the difference might have been, but the psalmist calls them chatzotzrot, and Moses just refers to them as those instruments that make the loud sound. Now, the fourth thing that I would point out in this portion um, uh, is that there's a simple little two verse section that is marked off. And I'm going to come back to this. Ruth Ann knows of what I'm talking about.
Mhm.
We're going to come back to this in a little bit. That this, after these shofarot, after all these announcements and the shofar blasts, the silver trumpet blasts, there's this little two-sentence quote that is set off in the Torah. It's set apart from the Torah, and we continue to refer to this in the daily prayer book. Well, not in the daily prayer book, in the traditional prayer book on Monday and Thursday, and on Shabbat and holidays, whenever we read from the Torah, whenever we actually open the ark and get ready to take the Torah out of the ark before it's read. We'll come back to that in a minute. Okay. Moses complains about having to lead the people all by himself. He's had another conversation with Jethro, inviting Jethro, his father-in-law, to stay with the people through their journeys in Sinai. But Jethro wants to go back to Midian, and Moses is reminded, both by Jethro and by God, to appoint 70 elders as his board of trustees. Leaders of the people, and they will be instilled with a spirit of prophecy. The two names that are mentioned are Eldad and Medad, and they are filled with not only a spirit of prophecy, but a spirit of ecstasy, and they go off in dancing and whatever. There's a whole other interesting story there. Then one of the most memorable little episodes is that Miriam and Aaron criticize Moses. Their words are that he married a Cushite woman. Now, we usually translate Cushite as Ethiopian or black, and maybe even Egyptian. Hello, Jean. Hello, Jean.
She's still
There,
connected.
there she is. Hi. Okay, we're almost finished, but welcome anyway. All right. The so Miriam first, and then Aaron accuse Moses, and they say that Miriam was the one who was the instigator because her name is mentioned first. That she brought Aaron along in the criticism. That they say to Moses, about Moses, he married a Cushite woman. And how dare he? Is he still qualified to be the leader? There are some people who say, "Aha! This is a challenge to authority," and that Moses was losing it. This comes right after he had said, I don't have the patience to deal with these people anymore." Da 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 da. Da. And so there are some commentators who suggested that Miriam and Aaron were citing the 25th Amendment of their time, and that they were saying Moses should be replaced. Look at these things that he's doing, like he married a Cushite woman, kind of thing. But no one really knew what was the matter with marrying a Cushite woman. Was that a statement of prejudice against black women, against Ethiopian women, against Egyptian women? Was it a statement? And most of the more feminist commentators assume that it's a statement against polygamy. That they're saying Moses, you're already married. You already married to Tzipporah. She's your wife. She's borne you children. You don't need to go out and marry someone else. And they put the emphasis more on the fact that marrying another woman rather than taking care of his being responsible to his first wife. There's a lot of midrash of that's why Jethro was still there, because he was watching out for the well-being of his daughter Zipporah. Didn't think that Moses was treating her well appropriately. Things like that. Um, the but the end result is that Miriam, no matter what the accusation was or what the motivation was, all of the commentators agree that what she did, and she was the instigator. Aaron just came along. That it was offensive to Moses. It was offensive to God in some way, shape, and form. We're not really sure. We're not really sure what. Um, Rashi, for example, says that Moses had separated himself from Zipporah, and that Miriam was coming to Zipporah's defense. Um, there are others who say, including Rashi in a second comment, that Miriam turned that into gossip, and so she was slandering Moses, whether it was true or not, that she was slandering Moses to Aaron, who was the religious leader, um, and then also Miriam questioned the why a prophet had to separate, and then she linked this back to the earlier story from last week about being a Nazir. Was what Moses was doing? Was he saying that it was okay to be celibate? But then he went to a Cushite woman as a prostitute rather than just being celibate from his own wife. We're not, all of these commentators have tried to speculate on what it was. Um, Yosef Kaspi, medieval commentator, said that Moses took the Cushite woman as a second wife because polygamy was accepted, but it was not liked by most of the people. Um, uh, and no, it's interesting in that no major commentator until more recent times. So let's say even into the 14, 15, 1600s, no major Jewish commentator accuses Moses, accuses Miriam and Aaron of being racist. There's no trace of that. He married a Cushite woman. That Cushite, Ethiopian, black, Egyptian, whatever it is just an adjective. It's just a characteristic, just a description. It's not he did something that he shouldn't have done with a lower class person or black woman or whatever it was. Um, there are some people who say, well, he should have marrying a Cushite woman means he married out of the faith, so to speak. He married out of could if he wanted a second wife, couldn't he stay within the Israelite community? Um, uh, there were concerns that Miriam and Aaron were saying, if he married a Cushite woman again out of the community, would that somehow unfavorably interfere with his ability to be God's spokesperson? And then again, the more prevalent commentary certainly is that Miriam and Aaron seem to be defending Zipporah and the stability of was her and Moses's family, and that by marrying another woman, this was certainly going to reflect that she would be neglected. Um, um, it finally becomes an indictment against gossiping or against slandering or against publicly accusing someone without knowing all the facts. Moses is the first one who goes to God and says, "What is the simplest indication? It's always cited as the simplest prayer in the Torah." Moses says to God, "El na rafana la," please God heal her, and heal Miriam from the leprosy that seemed to be her punishment. Again, Aaron doesn't seem to receive any punishment. He's a bystander. and it leads into other questions about Aaron's leadership characteristics, whatever. But so that's a story that usually occupies a lot of time when people talk about the Ha'alotcha. But I want to go back to pointing something out. And Ruth Ann, let's see if we can get that screenshot up so I can describe it. There we are. Oh, you turned it.
Yes, I figured out how to do it.
I'm impressed. Okay. So if you see just about 2/3 of the way down the page, there's two sentences that are separated out like it's a paragraph, and there's also little marks in the open spaces that those are actually upside down letter nun, the Hebrew letter nun. It's upside down, and you'll see it this way in a printed text. You'll also see it this way in the Torah, in a Sefer Torah. The scroll itself obviously doesn't have the vowels like we have here, but it's those particular verses. That's verses 35 and 36 of chapter 10 in Numbers. Okay. Why are they set apart? And why are they set apart with the inverted letter nun? What's that supposed to mean? Um, Judah the Prince, who was the editor of the Mishnah, says, in essence, these two verses become a sixth book of the Torah. It's really a book of the Torah on its own. The translation, and again, you might, those of you especially with a traditional background, even from Canada, but Vayihi bin Soah Haaron Vayomer Moshe Kumu Adonai V'yafutzu Oivecha V'yanusu Misanecha Mipanecha, right? And then that goes into Ki Mitzion Tetzeh. Okay, all right, right, okay. The translation of verses 35 and 36, and it was that whenever the Aaron would move, Moses would call out, "Arise up, O Lord Adonai, and scatter all of your enemies, and make them flee. All those who hate you, make them all those who hate you, make them flee from before you." And then when the ark would rest, Moses would continue and say, return, O Lord, Shuva Adonai, Revavot Alfei Yisrael. Make many or multiply the thousands of the people of Israel. So it's a blessing. It's a call. It's a call to arms. It's a recognition that God's presence is tied to the movement of the sanctuary, of the Mishkan, but also that God's connection and blessing upon all the people, to have them multiply, as well. Moses beseeches God to rise up when the altar would be moved, and to return and dwell with it when it rested, implying that it was Moses who determined when and where the sanctuary would move. But previously, God had said that the Aron should move at the commandment of God, and it should rest when God rested. Um, so is this a contradiction? Who's in charge here? Is Moses determining when the people would move, or is God determining when the people would move? And leave it to Maimonides, leave it to Rambam to resolve the issue. He says, no, this is just a further indication that there was total agreement. There was total syncing between God and Moses. They knew what each other was thinking, and when each other, when they wanted to move, when they didn't want to move, and so it's not a contradiction between the two or disagreement between the two. It's just describing it differently. Similarly, at the end of the verse, those who hate Israel are also those who hate God. So the enemies of Israel are the enemies of God. The people of Israel move as God will move, and when God will rest and be with the people, then the people will be at rest and at peace. Um, Having said that, there really is no good answer as to why the inverted nun is there. They the most I guess scholarly explanation is that and don't forget, this is from the handwritten scroll. The most scholarly explanation is that it was some kind of a clue to the sofer, to the scribe, the calligrapher, that these two sentences should be set apart in some way. It was an important statement of even a summary of all of the book of Numbers or whatever. And like I said, some of the commentators and rabbis saw this as representing an entirely different book of the Torah. But it probably was a symbol to the calligrapher, like what do we put, like the letters NB, like nota bene, like be really careful about this, make sure that you do this one correct, because it's so important. We have a few similar indications in the scribal efforts in a Torah. One of them being something that we're going to encounter in a couple of weeks, both in the sanctuary as well as in this discussion, and that's with the phrase that you remember from the beginning of the worship service, matovu. All right, is matovu, the mem is always enlarged in a Torah scroll, no matter who the calligrapher might have been, no matter who the sofer, the scribe might have been. That mem, to set it apart, to show everybody that ma tovu, and it's almost always. I've only seen in all my career, I've only seen one Torah scroll that didn't have it, where the ma of ma tovu was the first word at the top of a column. The scribes always try to make that, because it's so that ma tovu phrase is so important and so memorable. The other example, the most famous of which you might remember, is in the Shema, where in the Torah, and we'll encounter that in the second portion of the book of Deuteronomy, where the Shema is written, and the last letter, the ayin of the word Shema, and the last letter of the daled of the word echad, where those are written larger, also to call attention to the importance of the words, to the importance of the phrase. Indeed, many people call it the watchword of our faith. But originally, it was the ayin was there from Shema, so that people wouldn't be confused in the early calligraphy, because the letter might have looked something different, or actually because of the other silent letter, an aleph, and you want to make sure that there was no misspelling, because shin mem aleph as opposed to shin men ayin. Shin men ayin means listen or hear. Shin mem aleph means to default or defraud. So they wouldn't want to say that. And then the last letter, the dalid for echad, they want to make sure, because the letter looks similar to a resh, and Adonai acher would be other or another. And I don't want to say God is one, God is another. Therefore, they made the Dalet larger. Also, there's a lot of sermonic and homiletic and symbolic interpretations of what happens with those letters. But we do encounter a number of times in the text, and people have tried to surmise or try to come up with, well, what is an upside down nun? What is that supposed to mean? And da 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 da. And all of my teachers and whatever research I've been able to do is that it was some kind of a warning sign to the calligrapher of make sure that you do these two sentences correctly. And that's why that's set apart, and that's why those two letters are there. So with that, I will thanks, Ruth Ann, for putting
You're
that
welcome.
there.
Rabbi,
anybody
can
have-
you before Ruth Ann takes that off the
Oh, I
screen?
can
Oh,
put it
so
back.
sorry.
It's
okay.
okay.
What?
Put it back.
I've
I just
got it in the
wanted
book
to-
right here.
I just wanted to follow along and have you translate those two sentences once more for me.
Oh, okay. All right. So it should come to pass, it should happen that when the ark is traveling, Binsoa Ha'aron, Vayomer Moshe, that Moses would say or call out, Kuma Adonai, rise up Adonai, V'yafutzu, scatter your enemies, and V'yanusu misanecha mipanecha, and may those who hate you flee from before you. And then the second verse is that, and when it rested, meaning the altar or the Mishkan, when it rested, menucha is from the same word as menucha. All right, when it rested, that Moses would call out, "Return, O God," because the ark is stationary. So return, O God, and rest or stay not permanent, but stay stationary, and provide multitudes and thousands of blessings for Israel. That's a very, very loose translation.
Okay.
Rabbi, I wanted to wish you, both of you, a very wonderful travels, safe travels. Be careful, have a care,
Thanks.
and may God be with you. And we'll see you when you get back.
Thanks, David. All the best to you, Jean, to you and Cliff, Ruth Ann, to you and Sid.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. The next
I'm just
month,
sorry I couldn't have been here earlier. Had
that's
another
okay.
commitment and just was.
Understood.
But
Next
thanks
month, we should be able to meet. I'll let you know in advance if it doesn't. But we'll be doing it from Michigan, because that's a week that I'm on duty back at Temple Kolami in Michigan, the second week of July. So, but the timing should work out that I should still be able to do the class.
Okay.
Okay,
maybe I'll see
everybody?
you in
Oh.
Michigan.
Oh,
Right.
and if anybody wants to see a recording of this, especially Rabbi, if anybody comes back to you, until Les is ready to start editing and putting stuff out there, it will be on YouTube, but it will be unedited and unlisted. So if somebody wants to see it, I will be happy to give them the link. But we're not putting anything on the website until Les is
Okay.
up to it. Okay.
Incidentally, Les is recuperating very nicely.
Yeah, he is. And he's being a very good boy. He watched us eat hamburgers last week. I don't know how he could do it.
No,
Yeah.
he's not allowed to eat.
He's not a lot. He didn't. No, he didn't. But he watched us, and
Okay.
that takes a lot of self.
Well, thank you, Rabbi. Thank you,
Well,
Ruth
thanks,
Ann.
everybody.
Okay,
And see
thank
you
you.
later,
Have a good
David.
week, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
You too.
Thanks.